following program is classified G. It's suitable for all ages.
Tonight, in light of the Sri Lankan Parliament passing a new legislation for Special Economic Zone project, more commonly known as the Port City, neighbouring India has additional causes for concern on the security and economic fronts on this score too. Apart from the existing ones from the continuing rise of Chinese presence in the island. While Indian concerns on the security front are obvious, the economic ills befalling the northern neighbour may be hidden until it becomes too late. With the current government continuing to maintain an India-first foreign policy approach, the nerves up there has not been calmed. Will this project create a rift between neighbours? Will India have to fight battles in three fronts? Good evening, I'm Mahesh Johnny, and this is where Other Derana and the Morning investigates. And a very good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us on Investigates this Sunday night as well as we dive deep into a matter that affects you and me. Now, for centuries, Sri Lanka has always kept the needs and wants of our northern neighbour at heart. Sri Lanka is all set to go ahead with the much-discussed Colombo Port City project, which caused controversy in the past few months, especially after the Colombo Port City Economic Commission bill being presented to Parliament and the Supreme Court's verdict. Just to recap, several changes to the bill were ordered by the Supreme Court, which the government accepted in fully to adhere to. And in addition, the country saw many discourses for and against the project. While most discussions about the Port City project revolves around matters concerning Sri Lanka's sovereignty, laws and economy, Sri Lanka's neighbour, India, appears to be concerned about how the project may affect India, because the project is mainly funded by China, India's main regional competitor. India has raised concerns about the potential security threat Chinese influence on Sri Lanka and in the Indian Ocean region may result, and especially in a context where Chinese influence seems to be increasing in many parts of the world, especially in developing countries. Therefore, this week we look into how and whether India's concerns can affect Sri Lanka's economy and our sovereignty as this project moves to the next phase. Tonight, we investigate. As the conversation in the country last month centered around the Port City, the Parliament passed the Port City Bill 148-59 in the 225-member House after the ruling Rajapaksa government dispensation presented an amended bill to address the concerns numbered in the mandatory pre-passage determination by the Supreme Court. Port City was the brainchild of the 5th Executive President and the current Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who visioned that Sri Lanka could create a new asset that would garner more international business ventures like the Dubai Financial City, Singapore and Hong Kong. From the onset, then President Mahinda Rajapaksa invited India to be part of the project. Despite numerous calls to join hands, India continued to refuse. This is where the then government moved to the next investor at hand, China, who responded in a positive manner, pouring billions of dollars to the project. To inquire about the government's stance on the matter, we spoke to the Foreign Affairs Ministry Secretary, Admiral Professor Jayanath Kolomage, who said that as a country, Sri Lanka first needs to embrace the idea that foreign-funded or backed development projects belongs to Sri Lanka, and that is how matters pertaining to projects like the Port City project must be discussed.
Well, I think there is a fundamental error if we mention these as Chinese projects or Chinese-backed projects. These are purely Sri Lankan development projects undertaken by a Chinese company. That's a major difference. So when we say it is a Chinese project, it gives a very different connotation. but these are 100% Sri Lankan project. So therefore, I think we must look at it, we must approach this as looking at a Sri Lankan project. Now the port city, that is the latest one, I think it's the gateway for the future of Sri Lanka. It gives an opportunity to Sri Lanka to prepare for the next century and to face the balance years of this century with the high technology, creating smart cities, artificial intelligence, giving the youth of Sri Lanka an opportunity to develop themselves, contribute to the economic development of the country. So port city, I think we need to look at it as the future of Sri Lanka. So we need to look at this as a development project. We need to look at this as an investment opportunity, because the projected investment for the port city is like I think about 14 to 15 billion US dollars. Now what we need is the foreign direct investment to come and start working. And then, because unfortunately, we have to accept that we don't produce enough to export. But one thing we can export is our expertise, is our knowledge, is our services. So we must look at port city in that context. And also it is being created as a special economic zone that is needed, because Sri Lanka is not doing very well in the ease of doing business. We are in the 99th position, so we are not attracting investors or the prospective investment. Now that is why we needed a single window commission to make the port city work in a different way. So this is where we are at the moment.
However, Centre for Policy Alternative Executive Director Dr. Pakisoti Sarvanamuthu said that while the benefits of the port city project would be crucial, Sri Lanka has to pay attention to the international relations with India and China. He noted that Sri Lanka must see to it that the port city project results in the intended benefits, not precipitate international relations-related issues.
As far as the government of Sri Lanka is concerned, the Colombo port city is supposed to be a major magnet for foreign investment. And this is going to be a great boost for our development prospects into the future. But there is another dimension to it. The Colombo port city is predominantly a Chinese investment, 1.4 billion US dollars. Now, the Chinese would want to get something out of it as well. And this is where Indian concerns about the possibility of this being used for military and strategic purposes comes in. We have to be very, very wary and diligent, vigilant in fact, to ensure that the port city is functioning and is used for the purposes that it was meant for, and that it is not used for any military or strategic purposes. We have to be very clear with the Chinese government that that is the case, or else we are going to imperil our foreign policy positions.
Meanwhile, former Foreign Affairs Minister Ravi Karunanayake said that Sri Lanka should welcome any country to invest in the port city project without favouring selected countries. He added that Sri Lanka must keep both India and China as allies and should focus on getting investments from other countries as well. He further noted that partnerships with India are of importance and that not having such partnerships would be disadvantageous to Sri Lanka.
Where Indians must be given access to come in as much as possible to free trade zones and have an open air policy. That's the only way that we can go forward. So I guess instead of trying to be negative in the dark, light a candle and ensure all investments come in. That's the only way forward. Look at Singapore, look at Malaysia. That's the way they have taken the country that has invested in the economy, and then the benefit permeates down to the people. Let's have Sri Lanka having the same benefit. So I don't want to be just constructive, I want to be constructively criticizing rather than just be criticizing for the sake of criticizing. We have gone through enough. We have paid many prices, and I guess there has to be politicians that have the way forward, the courage of conviction to say what is good for this country.
Many are of the view that Sri Lanka cannot proceed doing business without the two major Asian powers, China and India, being part of the success story of this country. Coinciding with the Port City Bill's passage, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa reiterated that no one will be allowed to jeopardize the security of India. Addressing the 26th International Conference on the Future of Asia, organized by the Nikkei Forum from Tokyo, he said that Sri Lanka understands India's security concerns and sensitivities and will work closely with India and all regional partners to ensure that the Indian Ocean remains secure for the benefit of all countries.
Our foreign policy is neutral. We consider India our closest neighbor and a long-standing friend, and we understand their security concerns and sensitivities. We will never allow anyone to use Sri Lanka to jeopardize India's security. We will work closely with India and all regional partners to ensure that the Indian Ocean remains secure for the benefit of all countries.
Yes, it's true that we cannot turn a blind eye to uneasy nerves of our northern neighbor and continue to work on this project. However, nor can Sri Lanka stall plans, mainly because another nation lamenting about issues that can only be addressed in the future. When we return, what would happen when the United States is thrown into the mix? Welcome back everyone to Investigates. We are investigating India's concerns over the Colombo Port City project, as those concerns are growing louder and louder as we progress each day. And despite our focus is on India's concerns, mainly because there's a commanding build-up of a Chinese presence in the island, there's another superpower that is having an uneasy time too over the project: the United States of America. Now, in the past, the USA and India got together to overthrow President Mahinda Rajapaksa's government back in 2015, mainly because of the lean towards China. Would history repeat itself? Here's the rest of our investigation. The Colombo Port City project has since its inception made headlines across the world, especially in Washington and in Delhi. The topic of discussion: the growing Chinese presence in the South Asian region. To look into the international relations aspect of this matter, we also spoke to diplomat Dr. Dayan Jayathilaka, who has served as the Sri Lankan ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva in Switzerland, France, the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and Russia. According to Dr. Jayathilaka, the Sri Lankan government should pay great attention to the status quo and be more cautious about the way Sri Lanka deals with India and China. He opined that the government of Sri Lanka has lost its sense of balance, which has led the country into a potential minefield of great power rivals.
We have to remember who we are, what we are, and where we are. We are a small island with a multi-ethnic citizenry, population. Just 18 miles away from India. But we have conducted ourselves in a manner that is reckless. Now, I'm not saying that we should be dependent on India or that we should be a vassal state or satellite state of India, not at all. You have to defend your sovereignty vis-a-vis your neighbor. But you must also be mindful of the neighbor's legitimate apprehensions, and even those apprehensions are not so legitimate, one has to be mindful of them, because we are neighbors and we are a small state on the doorstep of a very large one. Now, we have not done that under this administration. We have tilted heavily towards China. Easily the most preponderant external influence on this island is that of China. I don't necessarily blame the Chinese, because any great power will occupy space and exert influence whenever it can, when it can do so unimpeded. I blame the government of Sri Lanka because it has not been careful enough. It has conducted itself in such a way that allowing China the kind of large footprint that it has in Sri Lanka has not been calculated in terms of how it will be perceived by India. We know that there was an armed clash, or a lethal clash, between China and India last year in Ladakh. Now, I'm not saying this side or the other is responsible, but there was a lethal clash. That's the intensity of the competition between India and China in South Asia. India perceives that the Chinese are making inroads and have made inroads on the northern tier of India. There is China to Pakistan, there's a corridor, very clear, and now there are reports of China building infrastructure in Bhutan. Now, Sri Lanka is on India's southern flank, India's southern doorstep. Since India is justifiably sensitive to the expansion of Chinese influence on its northern tier, it is bound to be extra sensitive about Chinese influence on its southern tier in the Indian Ocean region. Sri Lanka has not been careful about that. But it's also the fact that the port city is not perceived by the United States and India as a level playing field. So we have, or rather our government has been careless. And I think that if you have to go by what happened to us in the 1980s, we are walking down the same road, perhaps with far greater consequences, because the United States is also involved this time, unlike in the 1980s.
Dr. Jayathilaka added that the US and India both being concerned about the Port City project might make the situation more serious than it appears to be, especially as far as security and military matters are concerned.
Now, the United States is still the world's sole superpower in military terms. It heads up NATO, which is the most powerful global alliance militarily. But now that has been augmented by the Quad, that is the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, which is specifically to do with the Indo-Pacific region. And within this, the relationship between the world's most powerful democracy and the world's superpower, that's the United States, and India, which is the regional superpower and also the world's most populous democracy, is something new. It would be extremely foolish if the government of Sri Lanka were to continue to ignore the likely threat perceptions on the part of India.
When queried as to whether India should be concerned about the Port City project to this extent and whether India's concerns are reasonable, Dr. Jayathilaka noted that even if Sri Lanka thinks that India is overreacting, Sri Lanka have to take their concerns seriously, whether they are legitimate or not. He said that our capacity is such that Sri Lanka have to take India's perceptions and misperceptions into account in whatever we do. However, he noted that he is of the view India is overreacting. He opined that the facilities and the space that have been granted to China in Sri Lanka will be seen by India in terms of its potential, not based on what Sri Lanka or China says.
Colonel Hariharan, as I mentioned, has written recently, both in the Times of India and Rediff.com, two separate articles on the same topic of the port city. And he talks about possible Chinese electronics intelligence eavesdropping and interception of traffic especially Indian traffic. So there's a very clear military implication as far as Indian strategic thinkers are concerned.
Meanwhile, Dr. Sarvanamuthu, also speaking about Sri Lanka's foreign policy, said that Sri Lanka needs to balance its relationship with India and China.
The government has said that we have an India-first security policy, an India-first foreign policy. But what does that mean? We have largely had more of a China-first foreign policy than an India-first foreign policy. So we have to recalibrate and restore the balance between these two powers and try to arrive at a situation in which they engage with each other in the Indian Ocean region in terms of rule-based competition. Therefore, I think whilst we hope that the economic benefits will come to Sri Lanka, and there are lots of questions with regard to as to whether they will be fulfilled in full measure or not, that there are no geopolitical problems that are created by this, and that the Chinese too understand that whilst, yes, this is all part of their initiative with regard to one road and one bridge and all of that kind of thing, that it doesn't imperil the security and independence of Sri Lanka. Because as it stands at the present moment, despite what the Supreme Court has done, etc., we are in effect kind of creating another country in Port City. Now, that other country is still part of the territory of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. And all that entails as being a part of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka really needs to be taken to heart. And we have to therefore make sure that we maintain our independence, our sovereignty.
Speaking of India's concerns, Foreign Secretary Professor Admiral Jayannath Kolomage said that while the government understands India's security concerns, the government is committed to ensuring that the Port City project does not leave any room for any security issues in the region.
Well, you see, India is mindful of the Indian Ocean. That is very rightfully the case. And also when Hambantota port was created, India was very mindful about the strategic security concerns. But now I must tell you that because of Hambantota port, the sovereignty of Sri Lanka is not hampered at all. And now it is purely a Sri Lankan port managed jointly by a Chinese company and the Ports Authority. And above all, the security is completely handled by the Sri Lanka Navy. So the port Hambantota can never be used by anyone for any activity against India or any other country for that matter. Similarly, in the port city also, the entire security, because it is adjoining the port of Colombo, will be handled by the Sri Lanka Navy. So therefore, I don't think anyone should have any doubts or any fear that these facilities will be used by one country against another. Sri Lanka will never allow that to happen.
Adding that even though China has become a partner in Sri Lanka's economic development, there is no Chinese influence on Sri Lanka. Kolomage elaborated that Sri Lanka maintains development cooperation with China and defense cooperation with India. He also noted that the government is committed to maintaining this balance.
Yeah, Chinese influence are not there in Sri Lanka. Of course, China has become our #1 development partner, and also this COVID-19 vaccine process, China has become the main supplier of Sinopharm vaccine, so that is there. But then it doesn't mean that we are having any special special defense cooperation with China. Our defense cooperation is more tilted towards India, but our economic cooperation is now more tilted towards China. So there is a huge difference between defense cooperation and economic cooperation. So we need to look at this issue from that perspective. So in that way, I think we can alleviate these fears that these projects are not Chinese projects, these are Sri Lankan projects. The sovereignty of the country will be definitely maintained.
When questioned as to whether Indo-Sri Lanka ties would be affected by India's growing concerns, Professor Kolambage asserted that the Indo-Sri Lanka relationship would not be hampered in any way because Sri Lanka is dealing with China economically. He added that Sri Lanka recently promulgated a 20-point foreign policy directive, and the only country mentioned by name in that directive is India.
Now in that we say Sri Lanka will not be a strategic security threat to India. That means we will never allow the Sri Lankan land or the territorial waters to be a threat against India. So that is very clearly mentioned. But then for economic purposes, we have to deal with other countries as well. And basically the message we can now give to the world is, please come and invest. Don't look at these projects in a different way, but please come and invest. What Sri Lanka need is multiple investment from multiple countries, from multiple sources.
Almost all those who have expressed concerns about the Port City project have acknowledged that the project itself is not detrimental to the country, but the improper implementation of the project may affect Sri Lanka's economic development, rule of law, and sovereignty. Well, the Port City project is expected to bring debt-stricken Sri Lanka more investments, especially foreign investments. However, if India's concerns or similar concerns by other countries about the project worsens, that may jeopardize the objective of attracting investments. Therefore, as some who spoke to us opine, perhaps India's concerns should be taken more seriously and be addressed before they can morph into international level disagreements. So can Sri Lanka successfully walk the India-China tightrope about this spectacular city rising out from the ocean? Only time will tell. Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight on Investigate. We will be back next Sunday as well at 7 p.m. with another matter that affects you and me. Showbiz Tonight is up next. Thank you for the privilege of your time. I'm Mahesh Johnny. Remember to stay positive and test negative. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.